We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Snowmageddon in Baltimore positive here this week, as well as wild card action on Saturday night. Ravens taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Luke and I are going to be talking at length about the game. Then we talked situationally, last piece just about the rivalry and just the heaviness of all of these games and how they add up. The Ravens will be the second on a docket of 6 over the weekend. Not shocking at all that it's Saturday night. Those of you out there battling the elements and the snow earlier in the week and the forecast for the weekend and all of that, please drive safely. Take care of yourselves out there. Well, we've had some Maryland Crab Cake Tour stops up at Lib's Grill in Bel Air on suspension this week. So we're hanging out, shoveling out, trying not to hurt our back shoveling, and get the Planet Fitness and get all that going when you get into your mid-50s like me. Luke Jones is here, and he's not in his mid-50s, but he's in his early 40s, and we'll get to the Orioles and whatever the hell that was with Charlie Morton over the weekend. We're going to stick to football for now, but we will talk some baseball, you and I, because I know you're just like, you're ready, but there's nothing other than this football game, right? Like, I mean, for this organization, for the bad beats that they've had, for this road that's not an easy road, as I've pointed out, and as I point out my column this week, if you're down in New Orleans dancing on Bourbon Street 4 weeks from now, 5 weeks from now, they will have really have done something. That being said, if they're eliminated on Sunday morning, this is very, very problematic, and the Steelers sort of bring a lot of ugly with them in regard to this, and for Tomlin as well, and for the disappointments of Pittsburgh. There's going to be a fan base very disappointed on Sunday, but if you're a 9.5-point favorite, Ravens better handle the business, man.
Yeah, there's no question about that. There's no reason to hide from that. The Ravens are a better football team than the Steelers, period. And it's not particularly close. That said, you got to go out and beat them, right? You got to outplay them for 3 hours. It's a 60-minute ball game. We've talked about it. Go look at all the cliches from Ray Lewis and Troy Polamalu, and go down the list of all the characters of this rivalry over the years. Throw out Ryan Mallett and Charlie Batch, and go down the list of unlikely heroes in this rivalry, or unlikely villains in this rivalry. So, but none of that changes the fact that the Ravens are a better football team than the Steelers. They should beat them. They better beat them, right? I mean, it's a very uncomfortable, not conversation, an uncomfortable off season, uncomfortable in terms of where do you go from here if you don't win this football game. The path after that is what it is. It's not going to be easy. It wasn't easy for Joe Flacco in 2012, right? I mean, going to Denver and beating Peyton Manning, and going to Foxborough and beating Tom Brady, two Hall of Famers. So, looking at it through that lens, it's not drastically different from that.
And this is a better team.
Right. And it's the postseason. Everyone's good, right? I mean, it's not, yeah, it'd be great if they were the number one seed, but they've been the number one seed before and they've lost. So, I said this tongue in cheek really for, the last 12 months where I said maybe this team finally breaking through, it's going to be when, they're not considered the overall favorite or the overall best team, but they're still really, really good when you look at how they profile, especially when you consider how their defense has trended. I mean, this has arguably been the best defense in the NFL since week 11. I mean, that's how good it's been. I don't know if I'd put it at number one, because they haven't exactly faced a juggernaut of a schedule of opponents since week 11.
And they're not this week, by the way. This is not the kind of high-powered offense that should intimidate them in any way.
But my point is, their defense is playing at a really high level. So when you couple that with an offense that has played at a high level all year long, with a quarterback who's already a two-time MVP and is in the midst of the best season of his career, 4,000 passing yards, 900 rushing yards, 41 touchdown passes, 4 interceptions. I mean, just think about that. It's not just that this offense, not just that Lamar Jackson has been extremely explosive and productive, through the air, and also obviously Derrick Henry running the ball, but they've been outstanding about taking care of the football as well. Everything about this matchup suggests that the Ravens should win, and win by the 9.5 points that they're favored, if not more than that. But you've got to do it. And we've talked about what Pittsburgh likes to do. I made mention in a previous segment as far as I don't even know what Pittsburgh's A game is. I think their A game is to bring you down to your C game, and they'll beat you with their C plus, right? I mean, it's strange in that way. I mean, there isn't a whole lot about Pittsburgh, especially offensively. Now, the defense, that's a different story, and obviously they've got some phenomenal players on the defensive side of the football, but their offense, what sticks out about it that's particularly great? Nothing really. I mean, they've got some good players. I'm not saying it's completely devoid of talent, but compared to what the Ravens have at full strength, and we'll get into Zay Flowers here momentarily, but it's very distinct. So that's where I've said they better win. Not just because of Ravens Steelers, but just because of where the Ravens have been the last several years and what's happened this time of year. And there's heaven forbid if you lose this football game. I mean, I don't know where you go from here. That's what's so uncomfortable about it, because how can it keep happening where you're so great in the regular season and you're not anything close to that in January? So, but that said, all that being said, this is a team that has the advantage very much when you're talking about their offense compared to Pittsburgh's offense. Still has the advantage their offense compared to Pittsburgh's defense. Now, Pittsburgh's defense is good, but this offense has been great. And on the other side, the Pittsburgh offense has been at best kind of mediocre and at times plain bad. And this Ravens defense, while statistically in its totality doesn't look special, it's been really, really good since week 11, with the changes that they made at safety and at linebacker. So, it's as simple as going out and handling your business. Go out and play. You don't need to be the A plus version of yourself, but you can't be the C version of yourself, right? I mean, don't let Pittsburgh drag you down into the mud or the snow on Saturday if the forecast that early on in the week plays out. So, it's you have two teams that are familiar with each other. We know the history. We know the history that has favored Pittsburgh, quite frankly, albeit not in blowout fashion. And we know that Lamar missed a lot of those games. A couple of those games, the Ravens didn't really try, like the end of last year. But you've got to go do it. You can't let Pittsburgh hang around. If you let them hang around, then yeah, everything about not just Ravens Steelers, but more specifically for the Ravens, January, and you don't want to be tight, right? So, there's nothing magic about what the Ravens need to do. Go out and play your game and handle your business and beat a team that's not as good as you, and then you're moving on to the next round. It really is that simple.
Yeah, we can't even dwell on the Cleveland game over the weekend. It feels like a month ago, and both these teams have had the extra rest because they played on Saturday, and it kind of all worked out in the end to where it is. And Pittsburgh hasn't won in a month, and the Ravens haven't lost in a month. And I go back to that day after the Philadelphia loss and to say where the team was at that point. Kicker had it in the head. Special
Mhm.
team wasn't very good. Defense wasn't great. Offense was scoring points against most teams and still looking DVOA and all of that, but Lamar was falling out of the MVP race at that point as Josh Allen sort of took off and has become the betting favorite amongst other things too, which is I find it on a statistical basis. I don't want to get into that MVP argument because I was going to go down the road as Zay Flowers and in this match. We already did point spread and how crazy all of that is, but how much better the Ravens are than their record, how much better they are than their seeding. I don't know how big an underdog they would be in Buffalo next week if they were to wax the Steelers 41-14. I really don't know what the expectation is, but I know on a level playing field across all the talking heads that I sit here, all the people I know, I sit here and watch NFL Network. I watch ESPN. I watch Rex Ryan. I watch, all these people that have been on my show, whatever. They all love the Ravens. And they're going to love the Ravens in a fight against the Bills or the Chiefs because I think when they get off the bus, and I'll pat myself on the back and I'll write my column this week and I'll point it out, that the Derrick Henry factor of him being healthy, available, whether you love the guards or not, or the center play, or what's going on in the middle of the line, However you feel about Zay Flowers, however you feel about the weather. If you hate the snow on Saturday, you got Derrick Henry. There is a point for me where I do feel like we're going into playoff games with Jim Brown healthy, really motivated. Like if you watch the Pro Bowl thing, like I haven't spent 5 minutes with that guy. I mean, I haven't. I've never met him. I don't think he's ever. Maybe he's been on a radio row back in the day, and I looked across the room and said, "Oh, that's Derrick Henry." But I had Josh Jacobs on the show. You know what I mean? Another Alabama guy, right? So, but I've never met Derrick Henry. I've admired Derrick Henry. And if the postman would have gotten here in time, I have a little special something I'm gonna, you know, um, I'm gonna debut this week. Although the Oilers did not look very good in those jerseys on Sunday, no matter what. Put them away. But Derrick Henry's going to the Hall of Fame, right? And he's on our team this time. And all of those beautiful tweets that will look really good when you write Purple Rain 3 in a couple of weeks, where I said they would be, my word was unstoppable. Now, I got to go back and get the tapes because I probably was more laying it on real thick on the radio, talking about it. In a tweet, I just said unstoppable. And I do remember you and I having a couple of cat fights around trading deadlines 2 years running that, if they had Derrick Henry, if they had Derrick Henry, if they had Derrick Henry, they have Derrick Henry. It's gone pretty well, dude. I don't want to say I'm Kreskin in all of this or that DeCosta shouldn't have traded for him last year. But in a snow game, at home, away, it might be snowing in Buffalo next week, in Kansas City, wherever. Um, it's January, and Lamar's still the greatest player on earth. And now Zay Flowers is a question. The weather's a question as to whether you could put the ball up in the air. The kicking game's going to be a question, even if everything's perfect on Saturday night, because the kicking game's been a question. So how we're going to score points and get to 31, 34, 38, those places that we like to go back when the weather was good. Maybe you get to 23 or 27 or 29, or maybe those fourth and ones and fourth and threes and fourth and fives that, like there's just a lot going on here, man. I love talking football this time of year, and I love their story right now, like their pathway. And I'm watching it from the outside. But the thing about Derrick Henry that I'm alarmed by in a good way, I don't know anything about that guy other than he ran people over. I didn't even know the sound of his voice really in Tennessee for 10 years because I never paid much attention until he was running over us. I mean, I noticed that when that happened a couple of Januaries ago, right before we all put masks on and went away for a little while. Um, I think he's a special guy. I thought he was a special guy at Alabama when he's running people over. Um, People love him here. I love him enough that I want to put a Hall of Fame jersey on my back. But they've got something really special here with the DVOA and the legendary this and the legendary that. And I couldn't help but think, um, full disclosure, I have a special relationship with a longtime Minnesota Vikings friend, insider. And I text this friend on Sunday night when they're going into Detroit to try to get that home game back to Minnesota, get their bye. Now they have to go out to LA and play, and it's a whole different lay of the land. No offense to Sam Darnold, and we'll get to that in another segment for the whole tournament, but it's a whole different lay of the land to have to go on the road and do it than to be at home. And I think of the disappointments of the Minnesota Vikings. How disappointed are the people of the Detroit community going to be if Baker Mayfield comes in there and runs them over? So, like they're one seed. It's all sitting there. We finally had it after 3 decades here. Really 5 decades if you want to go back to 1970 and, you really want to get serious on winning Super Bowl V and losing Super Bowl III and where our community was then. But I think where Kansas City fought all these years, now they're just in. New England fired their coach. Can't get it right. Tom Brady's on TV. He's going to take over the Raiders. All that happens in these eras and things that go right and things that go wrong. And so far, the Lamar era here has been really pregnant with possibility. And it's been if he only threw the ball a little better, if only we could get him a wide receiver, if only we could get him 2 wide receivers, if only we could get him an offensive line, if only we could get him Derrick Henry, if only we could draft a generational player like Kyle Hamilton. If only Marlon Humphrey could come back and play like he's trying to go to the Hall of Fame. And like, it's all sitting here, and now it gets measured this week for all of this. All that being said, a long, winding road of me saying I love getting off the bus with Derrick Henry on Saturday. And I've said that all along, so I'm not going to be the one betting against them now.
Okay. Oh, you were betting against them a month ago, but yeah, that's fine.
They were
Look,
losing games. You're betting against the Steelers right now because they're losing games.
yeah, okay. I'm just saying. No, what you said, I mean, look, would it be great if they were the number one seed? Of course. Would it be great if they weren't playing this week? Of course. There's one team, two teams, one in each conference that can say that right now.
Well, they played themselves into this position, and it hasn't been
Sure.
because of atrophy or injury or
Right.
Lamar
They
didn't
didn't
play
play.
4 weeks.
They didn't play as
None of
well
that.
early in the season.
Yeah.
I mean, it's and even even some even you when you look at those games, weird things happened. Weird things happened in that. The Raiders game is the one that even more so than the Browns game. I mean, even the Browns game, that loss, it's a division road game. We've seen how that works. I mean, the Patriots went up to Buffalo and nearly beat the Bills a couple weeks ago, and the Bills are one of the best teams in the NFL. I mean, division games are weird in that way.
And the Ravens
Right.
destroyed the Bills,
Right.
destroyed them. And it'll
Oh,
get
sure.
brought up. We'll be talking about that all next week.
Right, right. But my point was talking about the division games. So like even that Browns road loss, yes, it was a bad loss, but it was a weird game, right? I mean, they had Ben Williams, they dropped like three. I mean, Hamilton literally dropped an interception that would have sealed the game the play before Jameis Winston throws a touchdown. They have one game all year where you look at it and just say, what the heck happened? And it was week 2 against the Raiders, right? I mean, that game right there was the difference between, not being the number one seed because Kansas City ended up doing what they did. And, you give them credit.
Well,
And
whatever that crazy 0-2 thing and winning the Super Bowl, right? Remember, because we went through that, right? Back in the beginning of the year. This is where, when you're 0-2, you wind up having to go to Buffalo and Kansas City because it's really
yeah,
hard to be 0-2 and finish 14-3,
yeah.
right?
I mean,
That you would
and
need to do to be a 1 seed, right?
right. And part of that is just that it's really tough to go 14-3, period. Right. I mean, all those 0-2 stats that we hear in week 3 about, oh, this percentage of teams that started 0-2 made the playoffs. It's because most 0-2 teams just are bad teams, right? So when you have statistical anomalies, it's important to remember that. I mean, the Ravens starting 0-2 was more fluky than, oh, they're bad, right? Cincinnati's a great example of this, right? Bengals are playing really good football at the end of the year. They have no one to blame but themselves for not being in the playoffs. They can't be mad at Kansas City for resting their starters against Denver on Sunday. Be mad that they stunk in September, right? Be mad that they started out 4-8 or whatever it ended up being. I mean, they have no one to blame but themselves. So, when you're the Ravens, yeah, you started 0-2, but then you won 5 straight and you got yourself back on good footing. And look, we can sit here all day and talk about home field advantage and the number one seed. I mean, the Ravens have been there. They had that in 2019. They had won what? 12 in a row, I think it was, when Tennessee came in there and beat them in the divisional round. Last year, they were on fire in the month of December, kind of like how they've been playing right now, right? Finishing up the regular season. They went out to San Francisco on Christmas night and they crushed the 49ers. They clobbered the Dolphins, who or at least a pseudo flavor of the month last year with that offense. And, we're riding high. They, kind of stubbed their toe a little bit in the first half against Houston and then took care of business. And Kansas City comes to town and we know what happened after that. So, yes, it's better to be the number one seed. It's better to be the number 2 seed. But they're the 3 seed. They've got a home playoff game. We talked about the importance of that, right? The idea of going on the road for the entirety of your January run is very, very difficult. We've talked about the 2000 and 2012 Ravens. As much as we think of those teams as road warriors, they had a first round home playoff game, and talking about that
Well,
importance.
the
So,
league tries to never give teams 3 games in a row on the road because it's just not right.
I mean, it's tough to navigate. It's difficult. That said, everything about January is just tough, right? I mean, even Kansas City right now, they're waking up and they got their butts kicked. Their backups and third string guys got their butts kicked on Sunday. Who cares? But as much as things are looking so positive for them because they have the first round bye and home field advantage, and they've gotten some guys back healthy, and they were playing their best football of the year at the end of the season. They're looking at this right now and saying, all right, if if all goes well, we're still going to have to get through, someone in the divisional round. It could be the Chargers, for example, who, hey, division opponent, another one of those you never know type situations. And then they're still going to have to beat most likely either Buffalo or the Ravens, right? So none of these paths are easy, right? There are paths that are more favorable when you have a home field advantage, but if you're the Ravens, you're looking at this and saying, look at the entire playoff field right now. That the AFC playoff field. Ravens played all of them. They lost to one. It was Kansas City. Isaiah Likely's toe on the back end line. If that doesn't happen, they're going for two with a shot to beat the Chiefs in week one.
And they're the two
So,
seed.
right. So, or, who knows? The season maybe has a different trajectory from that point on. So you just look at it and you say, okay, you're going to have to win a couple road games. They've won road games this year. They've won road games this year and beaten some quality teams on the road. And, you just got to gear up and go play. And a big part of it, and I think this is such a big challenge for this football team. And I don't just mean Lamar Jackson, although certainly he's the headliner here, but this applies for Marlon Humphrey. This applies for Ronnie Stanley. This applies for, the younger guys on the roster, like Kyle Hamilton, who, has been through it, but not as extensively. They all have to be able to compartmentalize and not be thinking about last year and not be thinking about the year before that, and certainly not be thinking about 2019. You have to go out there and play football and understand that, yes, it's important. And yes, you need to leave everything out there. And yes, you want to have the proper urgency, and you don't want to start, you don't want to come out flat, and there is no next week if you have a bad day. Understanding all of that, but also being able to put that aside and just go play. I think one of the most maddening parts of what's happened to the Ravens over the last 5, 6 years when we've talked about them in January is not that they've lost, it's that they look so out of character in doing it, right? If it were a case, if they had lost to the Chiefs last January in this crazy back and forth game where Lamar throws 3 touchdowns, but Patrick Mahomes throws 4, and it's just this epic back and forth kind of shootout. As frustrating, as heartbreaking as that would have been, I think there still would have been a sense of you begrudgingly tip your cap to a team that's also great. But it's just that we saw the Ravens look a certain way all year, and then they don't look that way. And
They ran the ball 6 times.
And that's where you get into that.
You'll never, if this generation, if Lamar never wins the Super Bowl and we don't have the parade here, that's going to be, that's as good as it gets. To your point, we can sit here and make all the excuses about Isaiah Likely's toe and the Raiders and all this. There is a huge difference between sitting home, waiting on the Texans to come to town, and like last year, and having a home game, and what that pathway represents versus getting ready to go slobber knocker with the Steelers without Zay Flowers in the snow on Saturday night. And then, okay, great, you won. Great. No style points. You won. Doesn't matter how you won. Now we got to go to Buffalo. Where they beat Denver, 37-10? I mean, you know what I mean? Like I'm assuming that's going to be a walk. But so then you go to Buffalo, and then if you make it, and you'd say, well, you beat them by 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns here. Great. Go win. Another cold night. Then you go to Kansas City. Now you get to where you were last year, except you're on the plane and you're out there, and there's, Yeah, you remember all of that from Thursday 18 weeks ago, except it's cold. And you might lose another player or two between now and then. They might too.
Sure.
But they don't have to play this week, and you do. And boy, just in 90 seconds, I just laid out the difference between last year and this year. Yeah. You better not run the ball 6 times. And as I go back to, you have Derrick Henry. By the way, I know you've been dying to discuss this, Luke, but I have not heard you discuss it. And I know you don't want to discuss it any more than who I saw somebody on TV over the weekend. It just said, I don't want to talk about this. One of the football players, MVP, the Lamar. Where are you? Because I don't give it a lot of oxygen, so I give it
Yeah.
2 minutes here with you. I'm sort of astonished that Lamar's just not considered the guy. And I hear cases for Josh Allen and the team, the player with the team that does better is usually the guy anyway. I'll hear Saquon Barkley. But I just the numbers alone and Lamar's ability to run and what he does with his legs, it's now being taken for granted. I'm in the. You're going to give Josh Allen the MVP? Why?
Because he hasn't won it yet. I mean, I think that's where a lot of this. Look, let me be very clear. I don't care about MVP anymore. I really don't. I'm so fatigued by that whole thing. I really am. And it's not because Lamar hasn't had a phenomenal season. He has. He's had a historic season. I mean, think back to the conversations you and I and so many other people had 6, 7 years ago talking about him as a passer, and he's a 4,000 yard passer this year. He threw 41 touchdowns. He had 4 interceptions. This is not a low volume passing attack
And the
anymore.
fumble
All of that.
thing. I mean, I'm gonna go back
Right.
to this.
He takes care of the
Nobody
ball.
does sleight of hand. Nobody takes better care of the football than Lamar Jackson.
Right.
And if you would have told me 6 years ago he was just going to be a so-so passer and a hell of a runner, and this thing was going to look like Michael Vick, but maybe a little bit better, but you would have said to me, he's really going to take care of the football better than you think. Like, he's not going to get better as a passer. He's going to be good, but he's just going to take good care of the football. If you would have told me that, I would have signed up for it and believed it. You know what I mean? Like the getting better in the passing and adding Derrick Henry, which was, of course, my recommendation all along. Like all of these, drafting the center, which nobody wanted to hear about, but I loved it because I saw how Joe Flacco changed the minute Matt Burke wasn't around anymore. It just changed everything. It changed everything about the first second and a half of him getting the football. As he was getting older and the team was getting less around him 10 years ago, I felt like the center was so important. And if I were writing Purple Rain 3, if I still had access to all this and I were a real journalist, I would slather a lot of that on. But the thing for me with Lamar is taking care of the football. If Lamar fumbles twice on Saturday night because of the snow and throws a pick and they get eliminated, I'll defend him on Sunday morning as still being a guy who takes good care of the football because he has. It would be out of character, be another way they lose. They've lost a
Mhm.
lot of different ways in January, right? Like this, if 6 inches of snow Saturday afternoon would change things around here, I think. But in the way they could go to the air, Zay Flowers changes things. But to me, taking care of the football is everything. It's everything. He doesn't throw picks. He doesn't fumble the ball in an offense where I would have told you, you're going to play hokey pokey with the football? Come on, the ball's going to hit the ground. I'm wrong.
Yeah. I mean, the Ravens set a franchise record. They had 11 giveaways all year, which I believe 2019, another Lamar Jackson year, I think was the previous record. They had 15. I mean, when you're averaging less than one turnover per game, you're going to win a lot of football games. And that's even not even taking into account like what your roster looks like. If you just take care of the ball, if you don't beat yourselves, it's a big part of it, right? You
Every
hear,
quarterback that's ever been jettisoned that hasn't been Joe Namath or Brett Favre, it's been because they've thrown the ball away, right? Like
I mean,
Jameis
it's
Winston's career, like all of those quarterbacks with potential, it's been they throw the ball to the other team. It's too easy to do. I
yeah.
mean,
I mean,
watch the backups over the weekend. Guys that don't do it often, the Bailey Zaps, they can look okay and they can hit guys across. They do all that until the wrong corner bites down and it's a pick six, and then all of a sudden everything you just did got eliminated instantly.
yeah. I mean, and you actually just brought up something interesting when you mentioned Bailey Zappi and just talking about quarterbacks. Go look at the quarterbacks in the league. Go to ESPN, NFL.com, wherever, and look at stats for the 2024 season, passing stats. Go look at the quarterbacks who threw more interceptions than Lamar Jackson this year. And I just brought it up. I'm doing this in real time.
And Lamar hasn't missed a snap this year, by the way, either.
Not, yeah, right. I mean, he was
He
pulled
got
because,
pulled, but he
yeah,
had missed a snap.
exactly.
Yeah.
But here are some of the quarterbacks who threw more interceptions than Lamar Jackson this year. Who, Lamar this year, and again, I'm doing this in real time. Lamar finished the season 16th in overall pass attempts. So again, speaks to the volume, right? His MVP season 5 years ago, he was near the bottom in pass attempts as it pertained to starting quarterbacks. So it just speaks to this isn't just a low volume, high efficiency passing attack. It's become a kind of run of the mill volume passing attack that still has incredible efficiency. So, but anyway, quarterbacks this year who have more interceptions than Lamar Jackson. And I'm going through guys that are not regular starters. Spencer Rattler had more interceptions than Lamar Jackson this year. Drew Lock had more interceptions than Lamar Jackson this year. Dorian Thompson Robinson, who is maybe the worst Browns quarterback I've ever seen, by the way. Threw more interceptions than Lamar Jackson this year. Andy Dalton threw more interceptions than Lamar
How
Jackson
about
this year.
Garoppolo? I didn't even know. I thought he was in witness protection. I didn't even know he was still in the league. And I'm like, oh, well, look, Jimmy Garoppolo's coming in. I'm like, he might have to come in a playoff game. He went to a Super Bowl. He almost won it. So like, I think about all of these names of guys out there that I haven't even heard of. Joe Flacco. I mean,
Joe
Joe probably
Flacco
threw
threw
three on
more
Sunday.
interceptions. Joe Flacco threw more interceptions than Lamar Jackson,
How many
despite
Joe
having
throw? A dozen this year?
he threw seven.
7. Okay, he can
Seven
play that.
in 248 passing attempts. Joe actually had a 90.5 passer rating. Joe's getting ready to turn 40 years old. So anyway, my point is with all of that, phenomenal, extraordinary job taking care of the football, considering how much the football is in his hands, not just as a passer, as I mentioned, he's very much, was middle of the pack in passing attempts compared to years ago where, he didn't throw as much. It was 20, 25 times a game. So doing that, but also as a runner, also the mesh point and the read options, as you pointed out. So my point in saying all that is I think in 2019, Lamar was clear cut. It was unanimous. Last year, he was almost unanimous, but statistically, there wasn't really a great candidate, right? I mean, go look at Lamar's numbers last year compared to this year. They almost feel pedestrian, and I don't mean that he didn't have a good season last year. It's just statistically, it wasn't special. This has been a special, historic kind of season for Lamar Jackson at quarterback. Now, Josh Allen's had a phenomenal year as well. He's been terrific. And I think part of what's helping him as far as that narrative is that the Bills had the kind of attrition that they did with their roster turning over. And, the Ravens lost some players as well, but Bills, both sides of the ball, they traded Stephon Diggs. Look at some of the defensive starters that left in the offseason. There was very much a perception that the Bills were going to take at least a half step back this year, right? I mean, there were even people who thought the Jets or the Dolphins might win that division. I mean, that's, and I think some of that's been overblown because some people will try to paint it in a way that they thought the Bills were going to be bad. I don't think anyone thought the Bills were going to be bad. I certainly expected the Bills to still be a playoff team, but I think there was very much a question of whether they were going to be right there. Kansas City here, were they going to be that half step below them? As
I
far as where
expected them to
they've
be
been.
where Houston is. It's kind of okay.
Yeah, I think that's fair, right? So I think
A bad good team, as you like to say.
so looking at it through that lens, I think that's where it helps Josh Allen a little bit. Look, I see some people, there are a lot of bad actors when it comes to these, these MVP debates, and frankly, both fan bases, a lot of the talking heads, you'll see arguments where it's like, okay, you're kind of being disingenuous in how you present it, but if I'm looking at it as objectively as I can, understanding both quarterbacks have been great, and in any given year, either profile would be very deserving of winning MVP. And understanding last year again, Lamar, it was almost by default. There wasn't a phenomenal candidate statistically, and the Ravens were the best team in football in the regular season, so it made sense, and it was fine. And Lamar's MVP, I would have voted for him. I had no problem with that.
And by the
But
time you got to Christmas, they're boat racing the 49ers. That
yeah,
kind of,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly, right. But again, it's not, he didn't have 41 touchdown passes last year. I mean, he was in the 20s. So, but I think Lamar has just been so good. It's been so impressive that I think if you stripped away everything you knew about these two guys and you just looked at their body of work, their respective bodies of work this year, I think you'd have to give it to Lamar. Does that mean he's going to win? He probably won't, because Tom Brady only won 3 MVPs in his career, which, by the way, no one knows, because why? No one cares, because he won all those Super Bowls. So for as much as we're talking about this, and I'll leave you with this point, because I have already droned on way longer about the MVP than I thought I would
No, we
have.
haven't talked about
But
it at all. I
yeah,
mean, we
well, it's
were,
because
if we
everyone
were
else has
like,
talked about it
if we were
for
the
us.
big bad morning show here, we would take 3 days worth of phone calls about it. So yeah, I mean, 5 minutes is what it deserves to me, but it
Yeah,
is,
but
there is something to be said about it, because at the end, when the case is made for him that he doesn't win, that would be unfortunate in this kind of a year, because it isn't clear cut to me. And look, if it's one more thing that pisses him off to win this week and win next week, then they don't even want him to win out there. And again, I spoke about Derrick Henry very lovingly here. I've never met Derrick Henry. I'm a fan, admirer of what he brings to an offense, especially this time of the year, which I thought was a missing ingredient, that I jumped up and down as a football expert person that has been doing this for 4 decades, that I'm pretty heartened by the fact that they're in a position now that they've given Lamar tools to win. Zay Flowers being one of them, it's an important one. And I hope it goes well for them on Saturday night, and I hope that this is the magic carpet ride that the city deserves. I, you got one more point, and then we'll
yeah, because
break.
I was
Because
I
we're
was
going to talk league.
I
The
was
Orioles signed a pitcher. Do you know that the Orioles signed a pitcher? Did
they
you hear
did
about that?
they did. We'll get into that.
Why? I heard about that on the WNST text service. So I just want to make sure that
Right.
people know about
Yeah,
that. Brought to you by Cole Roofing.
but I was getting ready to say my final point about MVP, and I'll leave it at this. And I already said Lamar would be my pick. If Josh Allen wins, I'm not going to lose a wink of sleep about it. But I'll say this. This is my ironclad guarantee about this. If it, and I'm making the assumption it's not going to be Saquon Barkley, but if it's Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, whoever the winner is, if they are in New Orleans at NFL Honors accepting that award rather than preparing for the Super Bowl a couple days later and just shooting a video saying, "Hey guys, thanks a lot. I'm getting ready for the Super Bowl. I'm honored. I appreciate everyone who voted for me."
Well, one of them's going to be there. Josh Allen and Lamar both came. One's going to be
Well,
getting the award,
my
and
point
either
is,
playing or not, right?
my point is, whoever wins, if they are at the ceremony and not preparing for the Super Bowl, they're going to be mocked by so many people, because at the end of the day, I don't even want to say the gold standard. The more appropriate description is the sterling silver standard remains Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, because the Lombardi's made out of sterling silver. So if it's Lamar winning the MVP, man, I hope he's not at the NFL honors again. And if it's Josh Allen who wins it, if they're not, if the Bills aren't in the Super Bowl and he's there, it's going to feel empty for him as well. It's going to feel
Patrick
hollow.
Mahomes is not thinking about the honors
And that's
awards
my
or any
point.
of that.
That's my point. And my
And he's not getting bored with winning, by the way, either.
and this is where I loved something that Lamar said this past week. I may have mentioned this to you because it was early last week, but he was asked about Lamar had a chance on Saturday night to set the all-time single season passer rating record. Now, it was actually ended up being one of his 4 games all year. He had a passer rating under 100, even though, it wasn't his best day, but he certainly didn't have a bad game by any stretch. He just wasn't quite as sharp throwing the football, 50% completion percentage. But he was asked about whether that was meaningful to him, if he could set the single season passer rating record, which, hey, passer rating's not everything, but it's one of the measures that we talk about it when it comes to quarterbacks and how well they're playing. He said it would be, if he was in his childhood mindset, that would be exciting to him and that would mean something to him. He's worried about winning games. I truly think that first MVP for Lamar, yeah, it meant something to it. It would mean something to any player, right? I mean, when you're recognized in that way, compared to your peers. I think last year, as devastating as the loss to Kansas City was, I think the MVP still, because it had been 5 years, it was post-contract, the 2-year saga, him wanting a guaranteed deal, everything that played out, right? All the other teams that didn't want him, all of that. I think that still meant something to him as an individual, even though he was so disappointed that the Ravens had lost. I don't think he gives a hoot about this MVP award. I really don't. I think Lamar Jackson at this point is singularly focused on getting this team to New Orleans. Now, Patrick Mahomes is going to have something to say about that. Josh Allen's going to have something to say about that. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to have something to say about that on Saturday night. But him making that comment about a childhood mindset, and that's where I think where the Ravens need to be as a team right now. Who gives a crap about MVP or how many Pro Bowl players you have or what your DVOA was or how many records you just set or how well your defense is playing from week 11 on. It's all about going out and beating the Pittsburgh Steelers on Saturday night. Go 1-0 on Saturday night. And then good job. Then you need to go 1-0, presumably against Buffalo the following week, assuming, things happen the way I think most of us expected to. It is all about that. It's not about style points. It's not about individual awards. It's not about how many guys made the Pro Bowl. This team at this point in time, the maturity should be there. They've gone through 2019 and 20 and 22 and certainly last year at some point in time. And Aaron Schatz made a great point about this. The NFL history is littered with teams that couldn't win the big game until they won it. Think about John Elway, the narrative of his career in 1995. Great statistical quarterback, can't win the big one. He won 2 in a row to finish off his career. Think about Steve Young, replacing Joe Montana. Couldn't win a Super Bowl. He won it in 1994. Peyton Manning. Oh, Tom Brady's got all the rings. Peyton Manning, he's all about statistics. Finally won a Super Bowl. So, look, Lamar is 20. He's going to be 28 years old here, in the next couple days. He's got a long way to go. And the way his career is progressing, that with him as a passer, his career is going to age way better now than you might have said 5 years ago. I think we would all agree with that. And everyone has to stay healthy.
I can do a whole Lamar thing. I mean, in praise of Lamar one way or another. The one thing, his health and the fact that I didn't like he's running the linebackers on Saturday, by the way.
Sure.
Talk about that.
Right.
And being smart about that, but also what defensive players can get away with against Steve Young and hitting him in the head. And every time I see Troy Aikman, I think of him getting hit in the head. All the guys that Merrill Hodge, who's coming on the show in a couple of weeks, all these guys that got hit in the head, he won a quarterback, but
it's a brutal game. Yeah. It is. And that's for anyone, right? I don't say this to be fatalistic about it, but your last play could be your next, your next play.
Dude, I told you I thought Justice Hill was dead 3 weeks ago. I mean that. Like I got up and walked away. I'm like, I don't even want to see what happens next. So the body's not moving,
but just to bring it, and I don't want to veer too much into that part of it, but at this point in time, what means more for Lamar Jackson? Being a 3-time MVP or being a Super Bowl winner? And whether you get a third MVP or not, he's going to have some other years where I'm sure he's going to be firmly in the mix, but because that's just who he's been. Every time he's healthy, he's there. He's in that discussion.
Read his stats off again and tell me if in any flat universe, if Johnny Unitas came back, read his stats off again.
Lamar's? Oh,
yes.
Let me, I had him in front of me and now I don't. Okay. So this year, 4,172 passing yards, 41 touchdowns, 4 interceptions.
41 touchdowns, 4 interceptions.
Yeah. A 10-to-1 touchdown interception ratio. That's absurd. Even in this day and age, back in the day, Johnny U's era, if you had more touchdowns than interceptions, even if it was 10-9, you were a good quarterback because teams could, defenses could mug your receivers downfield and everything. So inherently, it was a different game that way. But he's just been so extraordinarily efficient and so productive.
Is there anybody in the history of the game that's thrown 41 touchdowns and 4 interceptions and 4,000 yards? Just that stat alone. Is there anybody?
900 rushing yards too?
No, I haven't gotten to that.
No, but I'm just saying that. No, but I'm just saying you add. But that's part. But that's why I look at this and say, look, Josh Allen's had an outstanding season. but
Dude, this is like
Lamar's my
looking on the
MVP.
back of Ron Guidry's card and seeing he was
It's a video
27 and
game.
3 one year. You know what I mean? Like when I'm thinking of things 41 and 4 as a ratio and 4,000 yards for and the rushing, like, and then I'd say, well, what did the team do? They won their division. They lost a couple of games they shouldn't. Their defense was lousy. I understand that. We were making a case for Joe Burrow 5 minutes ago, and because his defense is lousy, right? Like I don't know, dude. Like I'm not for being the most anti-Lamar guy, the Lamar hater that I am, I can't make a case that Josh Allen has had a better season than Lamar Jackson. I really can't.
Yeah, and
And
again,
especially though head-to-head, Lamar won the game. You know what I mean?
sure,
And now next week's a whole different thing. They got to get through
sure,
this week
but
first. But
yeah, first player in NFL history. I have it sitting in. I was 99% sure, but yes, first player in NFL history to have 40 passing touchdowns and fewer than 5 interceptions in a season. I mean,
all
it's
right,
just
so like stop. It looks like an 8 jersey. It's a Curio Wellness jersey. All right, we got a break. We're going to talk about the other games. The Orioles signed a pitcher. Did you hear about that, Luke?
I did. Who's my age?
I remember when you were young. I remember we were all young. It is a playoff week around here. The Maryland Lottery sending me out on the road. I want to thank Gigi Causey, my favorite realtor, for sending me a three tripler ticket. This is like a real ticket that a friend of mine sent me as a gift. So when I say gifting, as long as they're of legal age, gifting is good. I have one last Ravens ticket. The Maryland Crab Cake Tour is presented by the Maryland Lottery. We're getting it back out on the road. Libs Grill in Bel Air. Oh, the weather outside. I'm just checking the weather. We're supposed to do. This is why it's problematic to plan anything in January in this part of the hemisphere, including football games on Saturday night. Luke will be back and forth, we think, to Owings Mills. We're going to be here at AM 1570. I promise you that. Our Listen Live is working, our Audio Vault's working, and everything at WNST AM 1570 Towson, Baltimore is screaming a Festivus for the rest of us in the playoffs. And let's get that Super Bowl. It's Baltimore positive. It's January. Stay with us.